Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is doing really good this morning. I am doing pretty good. Ooh, they changed our share up to only 10 people. I am in a lot of pain today, though. My nerve damage is causing sitting to be a problem. So I'm not sure how long I will be able to be on. But we're still going to come on and do some stuff while I can. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I am moving next month, in the beginning of the month, and I go into surgery on the 27th. Um, so the week of the 27th, I probably will not be here on that Wednesday because I will be recovering from surgery. I'm not even sure if I'll be home yet, probably, but not positive. And then with the move and everything, I'll probably be a little random in my coming in. I've done a lot of work over the last few months that have kind of reset who I am mentally a lot. So I'm hoping that that will pick up my time online and my activities. But I'm not going to promise anything either because, just life. But I just wanted you guys to know what all is going on. Today's topics are all on the Widda Ord site under this week under the under hybrid children as a tab. I'm hoping that, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm hoping that the background is correct in the text. It looks like the camera has been mirrored. I am on a little bit of pain management, so I am just slightly happy. So I might be a little distractible, not distractible, but a little bit, I might have to grab words a little bit more, just so you know. I wanted to discuss another find that I had found. Again, I'd like to frequently remind people that my field is changing so frequently right now that what many of us know today is different tomorrow, right? And so I frequently like to remind people this is my knowledge for now. My knowledge from now may change. It might be different knowledge tomorrow. We have DNA on Denny, the picture that's behind me, this beautiful human being. But one of the other hybrid children that I found is one that we don't actually have DNA on. So we don't know for certain what the hybridity is, but we have a little bit of thought process behind it, or guesses, educated guesses behind it. So I found this other child recently and I thought that I'd bring that in as well. I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about Denny recently either, and what this means about who we are as a species prior to the loss of all of our cousin species, right? Prior to us becoming the remaining species on the planet. Hello, Prudy. Yes, absolutely. So I think with the beauty that I see within this, and the amazing that I see within these discoveries, is the understanding of what it meant when we were not competing with each other, right? What it meant prior to competition as resource. Um, I like to watch those stupid reality shows a lot, just because I don't have to think, right? And for me, a lot of times it is the times that I can turn my brain off that's positive, but I still need to have some background noise if I'm awake, so that my brain doesn't go down bad tracks, like where I'm like ruminating. And so I'll watch competition or like stupid reality shows just because I don't have to think. And within it also, you can see a little bit of the competitive nature of human beings, which is not something that I've ever had. I've never been a competitive human being. And so it also gives me a little bit of insight into that competitiveness, right? And so I've been watching one recently, and I think that it really was showing and is showing this, you know, this willingness to break all bounds, and willingness to not think of others so that you can win at something, right? And I think that that's really amazing. And so with it, I think that it brings forward my understanding of prior to that a lot, right? It really gives me that deeper faith in who we were prior to all of that, right? Was it so 6, 8, 9? I have to ask you a question on that. So, first of all, I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist, and this is my field of study with degrees. You can actually see one on the wall right there behind me, right? So, my question is what is evidence of human on human violence prior to 10,000 years ago? Do you know the answer to that question? And my second question would be how long have we been here as a species? And I'll give you time to answer that. I'll go ahead and answer it for you if you don't. Right? No, based on archaeological evidence, right? Do you know what evidence is? Like factual, piece of something concrete in your hand evidence is? Just asking. I'll give you a second. You can't definitively prove that your subjective verbiage. You're correct. The correct word was verbiage, not herbage. Again, you haven't answered my question. You're deflecting instead of answering. Do you know? Because I have studies. In fact, I can point you to one right now, send you to a website, the one behind me, right? That will pull up an article that has nothing to do with my verbiage. That's a master's study, right, on this subject. I wasn't asking questions until I asked you a question because you challenged my knowledge. I wasn't asking questions. I was imparting knowledge because I'm here to impart knowledge. This is the box that TikTok gave me. You have your own when you get to 1,000 followers. Challenge you there. And this is the box that TikTok gave me. And I choose to use that box to impart knowledge because I believe that education should not be kept behind a $40,000 a year paywall. And I believe that it should not be gatekept with language that you and I can't understand. Even though I have extensive degrees, it's still hard for me to understand. Even though I've been reading archaeological magazines and books since I was like 5, it's still hard for me to understand. So I'm here using my platform and the space that TikTok gave me to educate. I wasn't asking you a question until you challenged what I was educating. And then I challenge you in return to have some evidence to back up your challenge. If you think that you're going to come and throw down, have a weight behind your fucking punch or step out. That's the challenge. If you think that you're going to throw down, have a weight behind your punch or step out. Weight behind your punch. Give or go. Not sanctimonious, meeting a challenge. And if you take a female appearing person meeting a challenge as being sanctimonious or filled with pride or any other level of thing, that is your issue and your societal machoism is issue. Okay. Take your misogyny as well. So when we're going to go ahead and talk about today is we're going to talk about the hybrid children that we see within the archaeological record and what this means. We'll go ahead and turn that off. I know that it gets really hard for everybody. So let me go ahead and make sure that, no, that's the wrong thing. So we'll go ahead and turn that off for the now because I know it can become problematic and it really distracts us from the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation today is who we are prior to that level of needing to interact on a violent level. What we are when we're living together in bands with other human beings, because Denisovian and Neanderthal, all of these other what we call species are actually other human beings. That's what the word homo means. The word homo means human. It's ancient Latin for the word human. And so every time you see a species that is labeled as Homo, like Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, Denisovian, Naladi, all of these are human species. And these human species are species that we lived alongside of and with. And the archaeological evidence actually shows us that we literally lived alongside the Neanderthals in two caves, 5-minute walk from each other in the Levant area for 100,000 years. And it is in this time, in this 100,000 year period, where we live alongside the Denisovi or the Neanderthals in these two caves in the Levant area, that we see great sparks in who we are as humanity. And it is this foundation that, by evidence in archaeology and by evidence in the different understandings of patterning of brain and evidences within DNA, we can see that that change and development within our brain that created who we are today, that created modern human, comes in that spark in that time. Now, that doesn't mean that people who are not Neanderthal or have Neanderthal ancestry are not that spark as well. It creates that spark within Homo sapien at the same time that it creates that spark within Neanderthal, and Homo sapien and Neanderthal are able to live alongside each other before Neanderthal is enveloped within Homo sapien, because Neanderthal at this time is such a small species that it doesn't have the genetic diversity to create more of its kind without having that outside genetic influence. Think of the Habsburg dynasty that gets so inbred that they get the Habsburg jaw and are unable to eat properly and unable to speak properly, and they have to go out and get different DNA within them, different genetics within them. Think of the Egyptian dynasties who get so interbred that they have to go out and seek outside dynasties and outside people to get that new DNA within them. Otherwise, they literally breed themselves out. So this is the Neanderthals. This is a group of species that has gone through several periods of almost being eliminated as species because of their small genetic diversity that they start with. And then they have taken this small genetic diversity down further and further until by the time they meet with us, there's so few of them left that they get enveloped within Homo sapien as a species. And that envelopment within Homo sapien and that interaction, because when two different groups meet, we grow up and we think, when we live in a small town, especially when we live in a singular space, especially, we grow up and we think within a singular box because we aren't given this outside input and this outside information and this outside understanding. We can only think within our understanding, right? We can only think. If you grew up in a single house, like, and you never leave that house, you only have the understanding of what the people within that house teach you because you've never seen outside that house. So when you see two different groups of people mix today, Homo sapiens, different groups of Homo sapiens meeting, you see this spark of understanding because you see two different boxes mixing. You see them mixing and meeting, and in that mix and that meet, you see this spark of difference, the spark of, oh, there's something else out there. Oh, I can get somewhere else. Oh, I never thought of it that way. Just like when you see two minds converge and meet. And this is why in scientific fields, you see people meeting from all different scientific fields all the time. Why we see that the movement of Black and Indigenous people into the scientific and academic fields has created this great spark of understanding as well, right? So when you see that the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals are meeting and living side by side in these two caves, you're seeing this spark of understanding. You see this start of identity. And this start of identity leads to taking us to the point that we are now. Now, all the tools that you have today start with Homo erectus. They all start with the creation of the ability to control fire, which is a scientific thing. The understanding of, I see it in nature. I have a hypothesis of what I observe in nature might be. I predict what that hypothesis might be. I test it. And if the testing proves false, I go back to my hypothesis. If it proves true, I keep testing it. And so every time I flint knap tools, every time I work with fire, every time I do these things, I am using a scientific function, just as Homo erectus uses a scientific function when it gives us these abilities. Of course, we've recently found that our use of tools actually comes, Oldowan tool complex, by way of from Paranthropus boisei, which is not even a Homo species. It's a great recent discovery. but not today's discovery. So Erectus, having given us that change from Oldowan tools into Acheulean hand axes, having given us fire, having given us our first use of clothing, all of these things are scientific things from Erectus that ended up with your phone. Because without fire, they couldn't have created steel. Without the usage of steel, you do not see an industrial age. Without the industrial age, you do not see a computer age. Your phone comes from Homo erectus's use of fire. So when you're looking at this, when you're seeing two species meeting, Homo erect or Homo neanderthalis and Homo sapien, both descendants of Homo erectus, both grandchildren essentially of Homo erectus, these two species meeting who are essentially both grandchildren of Homo erectus, this meeting of two boxes explodes thought. And this explosion of thought explodes everything within us that creates this expression of I am, right? From our first usages of ochre and charcoal to paint our bodies and our clothing, to our first decoration by usage of shells and different animal products, to kind of announce to the world around us, like all decorative items do, who we are, right? This starts with the meat of Homo neanderthal and Homo sapien, and this explosion of what we would today call the id, right? The thought of me, the identity, and not only the identity of self, but the identity of group, right? Because one thing that Homo sapiens are innately that is not seen in any other species is we have this extensive long life, this extensive long childhood where we have need of care. We have 5 stages from infancy, neonate, firstborn, to adulthood. Currently, that's a 25-year period from the time that you are born to the time that your brain fully forms and you are capable of that understanding of consequence, right? So when we look at this in Neanderthals, we see 4 life stages, but we also see within Neanderthals something else that we see within us, which is mandatory midwifery. This mandatory midwifery is because of the shape of the skull and because of the shape of the pelvic outlet. And because of the way that the pelvic outlet is like this and the way that the baby's skull is like this, you have to turn the baby a quarter turn as it's born because your head is shaped like this, but then your shoulders are shaped like this, right? So now you have to turn that child as it comes out the pelvic outlet. This is something we see both within us and within Neanderthals. Both of these come from our great big brains because Neanderthals' brains were bigger than ours. Our great big brains that are gifts from Homo erectus's use of fire, which creates the ability to cook food. And the ability to cook food creates greater caloric intake, which gives us greater brain development within infants and neonates and children at the time when that brain development is crucial. So that larger brain capacity and that need for mandatory midwifery comes down to us from Homo erectus and is seen in both Neanderthal and in Homo sapien. We're not sure yet if it's seen within Denisovian. We haven't found a big enough chunk of Denisovian yet to know, okay? We haven't even found a whole skull on Denisovian yet. Now with this, we see that this great big brain that we're given, right, gives us a lot of ideas and a lot of tools, but it doesn't give us the creation of id, the creation of understanding of identity, the creation of group identity until it changes shape. We started out like Neanderthals and like our understanding of most early hominins, with the exception of Naladi, with a brain like this. Now, Naladi, which comes around and is in the same time period as our development, 335,000 years ago to 235,000 years ago, roughly currently, has the same brain shape, excuse my burp, that we do now. And the brain shape that Naladi has, like we do now, is what we call a globular lobular brain. It's formed in lobes and it's a globe. We start like this being our frontal forehead area, this being our spine, and this being our skull that sticks out back behind our spine. And we start like that. We go to this at roughly ending 40,000 years ago. Now, the start of that brain shape change comes with that start of that change of identity. It comes when we start to see burial. It comes when we start to see cave art. It comes when we start to see body decoration. And all of this comes with that spark of identity. That spark not only of identity of self, But we see within burial this spark of that identity transmuting life, right? So the spark that identity doesn't end when life ends is where we see burial. This spark of identity not ending when life ends, and this spark of identity existing, and this spark of community existing and identifying really solidifies within our minds everything that comes after. And it's really a primal, innate need within us. When you reference back to the idea that we have mandatory midwifery, it means that we must have somebody help us birth our children. We cannot just go out somewhere and pull that baby up. Now, we've all heard tales and stories of people who give birth alone, and this does happen, usually with an extremely tiny scald baby, an extremely tiny baby, usually with a lot of struggle and a lot of stuff that we hear stories of like the one that I remember, though I really don't like the connotation, is the idea of giving birth out working in rice paddies. We have to remember, even within that, that a woman's not giving birth alone. She has her community around her because they're all out there working, right? So when we're seeing that need to give birth alone, we do see that it can happen in certain circumstances. Other than that, though, we don't give birth alone. And that need to have somebody else help us give birth means that we must have community. Now, you take that and you double it with the fact that we have those five life stages, which again is currently 25 years old from infancy to what we consider adult. Not what we consider legally, but what we consider on a mental scale, adult, fully formed. In that, we see that we must have this extended period where it takes a community to nurture. There is no way post this or pre this that you are able to provide for an infant completely on your own. And I need to state that even in this, you can't provide for an infant completely on your own. If I had an infant, would need to work to provide for that infant, which means I'd have to drop that baby off somewhere, right? You cannot provide for 5 life stages for 25 years of rearing for a child completely on your own. You need several different people to perform several different jobs. And those several different jobs have changed over the course of time. But when we get here and when we get to this kind of stage of being, those several different jobs include keeping a fire all day long and ensuring that the child is not getting into that fire. It includes hunting for medicines. It includes hunting for different plant life around. This is that gathering that you see, which involves more than one person because you can't go out and gather on your own and be safe. You need to ensure that you have other people with you because there are predators around all the time. It also includes, and I don't mean human predators, I mean animal predators. There are predators around you all the time. You can get bit by a snake. So it also includes the need to provide protein by animal resource, which means hunting, right? And that hunting or trapping involves needing more than one person for the same reason that gathering involves needing more than one person. And during this time, you need somebody to provide care for the infant. You need somebody to provide care for smaller children, right? In this, it means that you need a community of a few people just to provide the daily basic sustenance from neonate to adulthood for any propagation of species. A lot of times I hear things like, well, our reason for being here is to propagate our species, and that means I'm out to have sex. It's like, that's great, but pump, pump, dump, and walk away gets you jack shit. That does not propagate our species. To propagate our species, you can't just do that and walk away. You have to ensure that the child actually comes to fruition and is born. And then you have to ensure that that child is nurtured from neonate to adulthood, because otherwise you're not propagating the species. So the idea that, oh, I'm just out to bang a bunch of girls or a bunch of guys, pump, pump, dump, walk away kind of shit, doesn't propagate our species. It doesn't give us the ability to continue on. So, no, sorry, great excuse, but check another one for your reasoning, right? As we look at these things, as we look at the fact that we need community and we need nurturing, we look at the fact that early communities are looking a lot different than what we envision they're looking. Recently, it's been proven that even early Homo sapiens don't develop out a singular band of not Homo erectus, sorry, Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis is a subspecies of erectus, so kind of like the child of erectus. So we're the grandchild of erectus. So we've recently realized that it wasn't even out of one band of heidelbergensis that Homo sapien is coming, or even just heidelbergensis. It's a mix between kind of heidelbergensis and erectus and a couple other subspecies that we're coming from in pretty much the broader space of all of South Africa. It is not necessarily a singular space, and we're developing within this singular space. Instead, I like to think of it as many as a nation of many bands, as a nation of many groups. And that nation of many groups is frequently meeting for, harvest or yearly festivals. And within those yearly festivals, you're getting that cross of genetics because that's where you're finding your mates. These are things that early groups absolutely use to prevent inbreeding, right? To prevent that need for, or to prevent that everybody having each other's brothers, sisters, and cousins, right? Oh, awesome. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I have a couple that it's on, but not all of them. I'm trying to make sure that the YouTube address, if I get cut out here, the YouTube address is a great way to find me. I am live streaming on YouTube at the same time, and you can find all my content live streams on YouTube afterwards. So that if you want to watch them and you haven't been able to be here for the live stream itself, you can do that. I forgot to put on any form of like chapstick before I started, which makes it really difficult. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at an early start of humanity that involves a lot of interwoven thought process, right? Even in the groups that don't have Neanderthal DNA within them, and there are only two groups on this entire planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA, pre-colonial contact from sites, pre-colonial contact, only two groups on this planet that don't have Neanderthal DNA, and those groups are the Khoi people of South Africa and the Oyo people of West Africa. Outside of those two groups, everybody else, including all of Africa, pre-colonial contact has Neanderthal DNA. This is that mixing in the Levant that I was talking about, of those two groups living in the Levant side by side for 100,000 years, because as the Neanderthals are going back up, the Sapiens are going back down, and they're taking the Neanderthal DNA with them. Those two groups, though, have three what we call ghost species within them. You might have seen this a couple times over the news lately. Ghost species are species that we see a fingerprint of in our DNA, but we don't see the whole species in the fossil record, or we haven't gotten DNA from them, so we don't have a full species genome, so we don't know who they are. When we're looking at these groups early on, living and boiling together, right? What you're looking at is groups that intermix is what creates such a genetically diverse species as we are. And it is that intermix of our creation versus the intermix of Neanderthal creation or Denisovian creation or Florensis or Lunzensis creation that allows us to become the larger species of Homos that we are. Okay, so Neanderthal and Denisovian having come from groups of Erectus and Heidelbergensis that leave Africa and therefore are less genetically diverse, start as species with less genetic diversity, which is why at the end of their time, they're so small genetically, so anti-genetically diverse. Not sure how to state that, but they have a lack of genetic diversity and they need that enveloping within sapien at the end, as we were just talking about at the beginning of this. When we're looking at that, what we're seeing is that boiling that makes us this great, big, wide, broad species that, like Erectus, is able to make it across the globe. Because Erectus is the only other species to make it across the globe. And when I say across the globe, I mean literally. Check the Cerruti Mastodon site here in Turtle Island and San Diego, and check the Moy Hill site in Australia. Both of those sites can actually be found links to on my webpage, the widdaord.com site. I think under Turtle Island archaeological finds, I'm not sure. Um, I'm not sure about the Moyhill. I know the Cerruti is. But when we're looking at that, this is the result. This is the why. Because when you see that Neanderthals and Denisovians, which is who Denny is half Neanderthal and half Denisovian. Specifically, she has a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovian father. When you see this mixture creates that spark of diversity, gives greater ability to adapt to the surroundings. So as Erectus is leaving, Erectus speciates in specific areas, right? And that speciation is an intense adaptation. We as sapiens adapt to our area, but we never stop mixing. And because we never stop mixing, we haven't speciated, right? Homo erectus didn't continue to mix. It did in its grandchildren, right? But it didn't continue after it leaves Africa for quite some time to mix, right? And so it is that isolation that leads to speciation. But it is that mix of the different Homo erectus species who have specifically speciated into those areas that gives us advantage in different areas. It's been recently proven that it is the advantage of having Denisovian DNA that actually gives high altitude and underwater breathing better, right? And we see this in communities that actually have a higher percentage of Denisovian DNA, that they have those oxygen adaptations that they need to adapt to their environment in a lot better of a way. We see things like, and this didn't mix in with us, but these capabilities, and when we see them in certain adaptations, we see the advantage. We see things like Florensis is a product of island dwarfism. Island dwarfism and island giganticism, which comes into play in the Cerudomastodon find, to my theory and thought process. Island dwarfism gives you the ability to live in a smaller space. If you have less predators that are large, less food, and less space, you'll shrink, right? We see this in a lot of animals. That island dwarfism actually gives that adaptation within space to give the ability to adapt better, right? To not over pluck your resources, right? To not, like denude the land around you. Gives you the ability to live within your biome better. So we see that all of these adaptations that different Homo species speciated into, that they give to us this ability to adapt to those biomes better. We see absolutely that Homo neanderthalis and sapien spend most of their time intermixing within the Levant area. And we see that that's really where the majority of our lighter skin starts, right? And that majority of that lighter skin then later comes up through. And we see that in our phenoureic descendants, actually. And that lighter skin was an adaptation that Neanderthal gets from the speciation within Europe. And again, I always want to make sure and let people know that when we say lighter, we're not looking at Northern European current lightness, right? Which is thousands and thousands of years of adaptation. And that thousands and thousands of years of adaptation without the movement that came along before creates to an ultralight that was not there before, which is also not what we mean when we say Caucasian. Caucasian is actually down in the Caucasus Mountains, Levant area, what we're actually talking about, and also in North Africa. But what we're talking about is a lighter range, and it also can go very dark. Just like when we're talking about early Homo sapiens, we are talking about a darker range, but it can also go light. These are important things to note. When we look at the gene and the allele for light skin, it crops up 900,000 years ago in Erectus. And these are important to note because racism, well, race theory has fully been debunked, and we've talked about that several times within here. Racism is still so very prevalent. It's important to know that these are gene adaptations, or not gene adaptations. These are allele adaptations. These are adaptations that actually have very little to do with your genetic heritage and a lot more to do with the environment that you're born into. So, And the reason that we don't see these adaptations currently happening is because we changed the environment. If you don't have a lot of sun all the time, you don't need for your skin to get darker because you're inside a box all the time, right? If you replace the vitamin D with sun lamps, you don't need to get outside as much because you're in a box all the time, right? So it's important to note that these adaptations, well, they are within us. They are sparked by these mixes, all coming from the same the same species, and even the same subspecies, because we share the same subspecies with Neanderthal, and to our understanding with Denisovian, Homo erectus being the grandfather species, the subspecies being Homo heidelbergensis, which is what we would think of, not scientific term wise, but what we might commonly think of as our parental species, right? So our cousins coming from two different sets of parents, that's our aunt, and they gave us our cousin, the Neanderthal, and that's our uncle, and he gave us the cousin, the Denisovian, right? So when we're looking at these cousin species, we see that this adaptation, this spark that comes from our intermingling and our interworking within them. And we also see this and we have several ghost species, by the way. We have the 3 within Africa, we have 1 within Indigenous Australians, and 1 within Indigenous Turtle Islanders. And we have 1 within Denisovian and Neanderthals that we haven't found within us as well. But these cousin species spark that gives us, again, those 2 different boxes meeting, and that meet of those 2 different boxes creating that need, shows us that as these species are meeting, we are seeing this commingling. We are not seeing this fight. We are not seeing this violence that we like to think must have happened. We must have killed the Neanderthals off. We think that after the result of 10,000 years of indoctrination by narcissistic god kings who use that indoctrination to control you, that's why you think you're innately violent. And that's why you think that we must have killed off the Neanderthals, if that's your thought process. Most of us, I hope, by this point have gotten the idea that there are several other ways for this to have happened. And what we are seeing through the genetic evidence is that envelop of this species, this enfolding of this species that, like the Habsburg would have eventually died out, is dying out because of genetic inbreeding. And because of that inbreeding, they're getting their genetic needs elsewhere. Now, we use the word tribe to think of tribal. We use the word tribe to think primitive. The word tribe is a Roman word. It applied to the Romans themselves. They were a tribe of Italy of Italians. And the word trib, means a genetic unit. So it is a group based on a family unit, right? It is a group based on family lines. You might think clans within Scotland, right? Where you have a clan chief and all of the people within his group are all people of his family line, which we also see clan continue to mean. When you're looking at these groups, we're not seeing tribes. What we're seeing is bands. Bands is a group that does not have genetic affiliation, but works together as a community to care for each other. Again, with the burping, excuse me. So what we're seeing within these early groups is we're seeing bands. We're seeing bands that are going to consist of Neanderthal and Denisovian and Sapien. And these bands are coming together and working together and mixing together. And in this coming together and working together and mixing together, we're seeing these hybrid children being created, and we're seeing our genetic ancestors coming about. It is, in fact, with this band and with this mix that every being on the planet today really becomes created. Because again, I remind you that in the spaces that we don't see Neanderthal DNA in Africa, we see 3 ghost species. So it is within these bands and within these interminglings, within this community, within this nurturing, without a divide of you don't look like me, that we see the spark of humanity today. So I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions for a while, and then we'll go ahead into the evidence within these 2 children. And again, I apologize about having to turn off the comments. It gets a lot for me and it gets a lot for my moderators who are desperately trying to keep it going and keep it up and going. So I do hope that your evolution is a lie was said before I turned off comments, because if you waited around for that, there's little hope. Um, no, I think I'm good. So Denny is somebody we've talked about before in here. She's actually one of the first things that I talked about in here. She was one of the first finds. Denny is 90,000 years old, and she was 13 when she died. We have a 2-inch piece of her thigh bone that we found in the Denisova cave in Russia. The Denisova cave in Russia is pretty much littered with bones. And this littering is little pieces of bones. Now, for those of you who don't know, ancient DNA is something that's recent on the recent on the scene. It's only about 20 years old. And last year, the man who invented polymerase chain reaction, the ability for us to process ancient DNA, which is a replication of DNA, won the Nobel Peace Prize. Svante Pablo, that's what I was going to get. Give me 2 seconds. Let me go grab my. The indigenous people of the United States or of the Americas are Turtle Island phenotypically indigenous. I happen to be Turtle Island indigenous as well as Sudanese and as well as many other things. I mean, I'm not from Sudan, so I'm not Sudanese, but Sudanese ancestry. Phenotypical Turtle Island indigenous people tend to have a copper undertone to their skin. That skin tone can range from extremely light to extremely dark, depending on the region of the equator, just like in Africa. That skin tone can range, and just like everywhere else. I'll be right back. Sorry, I forgot to put my chapstick on and my lips get all weird. John Mosley, The Legacy. African DNA doesn't have Neanderthal DNA. Explain why that is. It's not true. So there's 2 species in Africa that don't have Neanderthal DNA, the Kwe people of South Africa, and the Oyo people of West Africa. And they have 3 ghost species within them. Everywhere else in Africa, from pre-contact or pre-colonial finds, has Neanderthal DNA. And that's because of that mixing of the Neanderthals and the sapiens within the Levant for 100,000 years, because the sapiens would go back into Africa and the Neanderthals would go back up into Eurasia. And it was this, we've constantly traveled, we've constantly flowed, we've constantly moved. The idea that we're local is really new. Absolutely, absolutely. And that stuff can be found. It's on the Widda Ord site. I believe it's under Homo erectus, or maybe it's under Homo sapien. Let me take a look really quick and I can tell you which bibliography. There's a bibliography tab and it gives DNA and stuff like that. Okay, so under bibliographies, under the tab that says Neanderthal, it will give you studies that have been done to show DNA of Neanderthals within African people outside of those 2 groups pre-colonialism. It's behind me. It's the links on nwiddaord.com. The YouTube channel is the n.widda.ord ... but the links on nwiddaord.com will take you there and everywhere else. Absolutely, absolutely. And The links for today's discussion, though, all of that prior stuff is found under the other bibliographies. But the links for the hybrid children is under this week, and it has a tab that says hybrid children. Again, I probably won't be on too long today. I have nerve damage in my spine, and some days sitting is impossible. Today happens to be one of those days that sitting is not my best friend. And so I might not be on for too long today just because of that. And again, like I was stating earlier, I am going into surgery on the 27th. So I probably will not be here that week on Wednesday because I'll probably be laying down. And then I am moving on the 11th. So well, I will be here outside of that week, and always at the Wednesday timeframe. Anything else will be a little bit sporadic. Absolutely, John. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, C1 and C3 touch. C7 through 4 stick straight out front like this, and then C1 and C3 do this. And because of that, everything from there down decides to hate me from time to time. But my tailbone actually likes to sit straight down instead of curve like it's supposed to. And because of that, it causes pain when I sit. And being indigenous, I have a very flat hind end. Like there's like, I've tried to put meat on it, but there's just so little meat on it that sitting also makes it hard because there's just nothing there to cushion my tush. So it all combines to make sitting hard some days. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There's good days and bad days. It just comes and it goes. I'm a disabled war vet, and it all ties into that. And so I just deal with it and do the best I can. I've tried. They hurt. I have one. I even went and got a fancy one that like lowered down for my thighs because I thought maybe that was the problem I was having. They're not working. They make it worse actually. Like they because there's not enough there. I'm like, maybe I should medically get a BBL. I'm going for a BBL medically. Can I convince them? Because there's just no fat there. Like there's just nothing to sit it on. Like right now I'm sitting on a cushion hoping that helps, but it has to be flat. Otherwise, like it pinches the rest of the nerves because my body is fucked. But everything has a silver lining. Everything has a silver lining, and everything has, the ways that it put me through school, right? And it gives me the ability to function in the way that I don't have to go out and function at this point. So it depends on where you're at. I think particular. Portland is actually pretty good, though. Not always. I mean, like Portland. Governmental structure has a lot of racism within it. And depending on how you come in contact with or where you come through, I've had people experience negative things within Portland VA, but most people are pretty positive. Not so much with Vancouver. It just really depends, I think. And it, it really depends on if you can self-advocate as well. I had a hard time self-advocating for a while. But once I was able to self-advocate, I was able to get a little bit better. So when we're looking at hybrid children of these species, what we're looking at is the direct evidence of these mixings, of these bands of people living together. Again, I want to remind you that we need to have. Oh, yeah, that sucks ass. Again, we're looking at the fact that we need to have community as a species. We must have community to subscribe. To survive. We must have, I was trying to mix survive and subsist. We must have community to survive. We have to have that community so that somebody can gather water where somebody else is gathering fruits and nuts and somebody else is tending a fire and making sure the baby's safe. Like we need to have those things. A lot of studies on what we call hunter-gatherer groups are proving that people who live in what we consider to be a hunter-gatherer lifestyle have a tendency to work less. have a tendency to have a better work-life balance. The hard scrabble that we want to think of that comes from hunter-gatherer thought process is not there. It's non-existent. Not only is it non-existent, but the idea that hunter-gatherer groups are actually like homeless or like without home or without stable environment is extremely false. Most hunter gatherer groups are actually moving within a pattern where they're returning to the same space every year. Many times they will have a home already in that space. So they're returning to early on, maybe a cave. We know within the Pacific Northwest, a lot of times this would be like of the Americas, that this would be like cedar houses, right? Cedar long hauls. And they would return to these spaces year after year, spring here, summer there, winter here, fall here. And we know the same thing within caves and within early subsistence. With this migratory pattern, it's important to remember that you're not looking at wide ranges. You're not looking at a group of people all the time. Some of the times you very rarely, actually, you might, I would say it's more on the rare side where you're seeing 100 miles in a migratory pattern. And that would be because of need for subsistence, right? That would be because they travel every year to the coast to get something, but they like to winter inland or something like that. But with this, you're seeing that you're within a local group, a local area pretty much, and you're, moving. You see, we classify two different classifications, hunter-gatherer and collector. The difference in this classification is that the hunter-gatherer is moving on a yearly cycle, whereas the collector stays in the same space and leaves that space on a yearly cycle to gather. So if you are, again, the Pacific Northwest is home, so sometimes it's easiest to focus there. If you're in the Pacific Northwest in a collector group, you might have your locale here, and you might go here to do a salmon run, and you might go here to do a mussel run, at certain seasons, whereas you might go up here to get berries. You're going to, and you're going to do your salmon run. Fuck me if my yearly cycles are messed up. I want to say in the fall, but I could be wrong. But like you're going to do your salmon run during salmon run, you're going to go in the fall to hunt berries in the area that you have been picking berries for 100 generations. So you're not looking at not understanding these areas any more than you're looking at not understanding these areas with hunter-gatherer groups who are going to the same spaces every year, living in the same space. Sometimes you see that one story that sticks out is winter camp along the river for a specific plains nation who would camp here and then here, which is like 100 yards or something like that, and then here. And this would be winter 1, winter 2, winter 3, winter 4, winter 5, winter 6, right? So you might, if you're not building a house that's staying there year after year, you might move it slightly. And this is because of the understanding of the earth, and that mix with the earth. You don't want to affect the earth, right? And if you're putting your camp in the same space every year, then every year you're affecting that area. If you put it there 1 year and then you move, so it's not in the same space next year, you're going to allow that first and that last area to regrow, right? Give them a couple years in a cycle. This is, again, that animistic, indigenous is what we call it as well, but that animistic understanding of being a part of the biome, of working and tending and growing within the biome instead of trying to change the biome. You see with a lot of animistic indigenous collector groups that they understand that as well. And so the spaces that they have as their year-round space, their base, their where they live is going to be very integrated with the environment. It's not going to be something that stands out, which is one of those reasons that we don't find a lot of that stand out within here within Turtle Island. And we get all like, well, they don't have vast cities. They have vast cities. We have this understanding that a vast city is only a city that we can see through archaeological context that has been there for 1,000 years, because somewhere within the Middle East, within that advent of Western thought, comes that advent again with those narcissistic god kings of the idea of eternity. that I must leave my mark for all of eternity. Indigenous groups, animistic groups don't need to leave a mark. They don't need to be eternal. They realize that they're eternal anyways. So within that, you see that great cities were absolutely documented, absolutely built, but those great cities are absolutely documented and absolutely built are things that are able to be reclaimed by the biome around them within a few years, because there isn't this need to make your mark. There isn't this need to be seen forever. There isn't this egotism, right? And this idea that you're separate. And in this lack of idea that you're separate, this working with the biome that we see within indigenous communities that are still able to have that today, we see that this traces back to the start of us. This comes back to the very start of us as a human, as a species, right? At the very start of Homo sapien as a species, the very start of the species before us, right? Well, when we are eternal. Western thought says that you're only eternal if the generations after you knew who you were, and see it in the archaeological record or in statues or stone buildings. But the fact of the matter is that energy is eternal, right? Science teaches us that we're all energy. Science teaches us that energy is eternal. So therefore, we are all eternal because we are all a part of an energy base and an energy field. If we realize that we are all eternal as a part of this energy field and that we're just a part of this biome, then we realize that when we depart the material plane like this, get rid of our meat shield, right? That we still imprint. Like, first of all, now we understand that epigenetics means that we're imprinted on the generations to come, right? So we're not only imprinted on the generations to come, on our children and grandchildren, but we're also a part of the biome again, right? So when this meat shield collapses back into dust and the consciousness, the energy of me that forms my consciousness returns to the energy. Personally, I believe that it's just all this ball of energy and it all intermixes and interacts, right? When my conscious returns to that and chooses, what to do from there, I do believe it is still conscious. When my conscious returns to that, this form, this atom, this accumulation of energy is going to replenish the world, right? As long as it's not buried inside a concrete box, it will sink into the earth. And that sinking into the earth, depending on how it's done and where it's done, can provide nutrients for plants, right? Can provide continued life, right? This realization is very huge among most animistic groups, that we never die, we continue on. And that continuation doesn't need to be, you knew the exact words that I said. That continuation doesn't need to be, you saw a stone monument that was put up for me. That continuation is in my grandchildren's smiles, right? In my grandmothers come from across the globe. And I try to remind myself and encourage you to remind yourself frequently that my grandmothers and your grandmothers and grandfathers are proud of who you are today. They're proud of the time that you take off from work. They're proud that you can sit in a safe and warm environment and drink something comforting. They're proud that you have a full stomach. They're proud that you accomplished what we are supposed to be accomplishing, our safety and our security and the safety and security of our families, right? So we often think, that they struggled way more than they did because they didn't struggle like we struggle. Okay. And we often think that we're safer, more secure, which isn't necessarily true. I try and talk about that when we talk about cave art and we talk about living in the same space for 300 generations and not having to worry about some government stealing it from you, right? but they are proud of the fact that you have worked hard to accomplish, and they're proud of the fact that you are safe and warm and dry today. And if you are not safe and warm and dry today, they are proud of you still. They are proud that you have given everything you have to this shit. And whether you made it out following some societal standards or not, they're proud that you're still here, that you're resilient, right? And they're proud that you can live through the struggles that they might not have been able to, but that you are representative of the struggles that they were able to live through, right? So, oh, I would much prefer a pass. I have somebody helping me find housing. And I was like, if I could just get into a house, like it wasn't an apartment, I'll accept an apartment. And I ended up getting into an apartment, but it's got a dog park, which makes me happy. Um, but if I could just get into a house instead of an apartment, I'd be so happy. Could you get me out of this fucking city? Because it's driving me insane. I'm so a country girl. Um, but they are proud, right? And I think that that's something we often don't think of. This is an accomplishment where we're at. This is an accomplishment of this is an accomplishment of survival against some seriously stacked odds, right? Because yes, there are people that have the odds stopped for them, right? But and very much in certain environments, certain things will help stack the odds for you. But unless you're born with money, there is an entire group of people out there who thinks that you are less than human and you're there to be exploited, right? So we are all surviving against odds. It doesn't matter what we look like, right? So I think that that's an important thought process to grab onto, right? That we are the beauty and the joy of our grandparents. And when we look at the fact that groups prior to Western thought did not have a need to have that egotistical thousand millennial stone dick shaped thing over there, we absolutely see that eternity is in your descendants. Eternity is in your grandchildren. Eternity is in the seventh generation. Eternity is in what comes after, right? And your eternity is melding back into this biome and in this environment and becoming a part, right? It is definitely not in some statue that, we don't know jack shit about who they were, just what somebody said about them, propaganda wise, right? It is in that shift that we really start to see the drop, right? And this idea that we have to have people to blame so that it's easier for certain people to get to the top or maintain their control. Again, we get back to those narcissistic God kings. It's always going to get back into them. We see that prior to that need, we do not see that groups of humans had the need to compete, that groups of humans had the need to beat each other out for limited supplies. We're currently beating each other out for supplies that aren't limited. We're just told they're limited, right? This idea that you have to beat each other out for supplies comes from that narcissistic God King thought process, and it doesn't come into play before that. So before that, you see that Neanderthals and Denisovians and Homo sapiens are all living together and mixing together, and all these other ghost species that we don't know yet are all mixing together and living together, because that mixing together and living together not only gives them that community that keeps them alive, but it gives them that genetic diversity that a couple of those groups absolutely need to get on, because again, inbreeding. And it gives them this vast new knowledge of thought and tools and everything around them, right? Adaptation to environment, right? If you walk into an environment and instead of killing every member of that environment, you ask them how to live in that environment, you might actually learn a thing or two. Go figure, right? So when we're seeing early groups of Homo sapiens coming out of Africa, and I always like to reiterate, maybe, not sure. Anyways, yeah, fuck off. I always like to double down on the fact that the last group of Homo sapiens, the last common ancestor of everybody outside of Africa, except for indigenous Australians, which is 70,000 years old, the last ancestor of everybody else outside of Africa is 50,000 years ago. There is absolutely proof that those who made it to Turtle Island mixed with the Denisovians for 10,000 years after they left Africa before they made it to Turtle Island. So there is at least 10,000 years spent in Eurasia. Newer proof is showing a southern route to Turtle Island and that they met up with a group of Homo erectus who had made it over here and speciated this Rudy Macedon find. That would be the stories within Turtle Island indigenous creation stories that talk about created here. Because when sapien comes here, like they envelop all of these other species who have such narrow genetic diversity, when they speciate from erectus, when sapien comes here and finds the descendants of erectus that are here, they envelop them within as well. This is the ghost species that we see within Turtle Island indigenous DNA. Because again, we do see a ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous DNA, just like we see a ghost species within Australian indigenous DNA. Both of these from pre-contact finds, so graves pre-contact, so not bringing in any added genetic diversity from Eurasia or anywhere else. So when we look at that and we see this migration across, we see this mixing of us with other species that are already out there that have adapted to those areas, and this mixing within this adaptation, this living within these groups of people. Because very honestly, if you know where all the best berry patches are and all the good hunting is, I really want to know you. As we're seeing this and as we're seeing these enveloping of these communities within us, right? This is what we're going to see. We're going to see these babies that are mixed, these babies that are two different species of Homo. Now, Denny is Denisovian and Neanderthal since 1, I think, or noon. I mean, it's 1 now, since noon. I probably won't be on for too much longer. I'm trying as long as I can, but my body's not working today. Hello, Tamara. It's good to see you, love. I'm going to show a different picture. This is the other one that I have found recently, and this is what I am just adoring right now. Now, with Denny, we absolutely see that we have DNA from Denny. So we know within the DNA that Denny is half Denisovian and half Neanderthal. Having only found 2 inches of her thigh bone, that's really all we know of Denny. This here, I'm going to put my picture down here just so I can see any verbiage better. This here is the Lupita child, Lupito child. The Lupito child is found in Spain. And now again, under this week on the widdaord.com website, it was just behind me. It's my name without the dots and the .com. Under this week, you'll see hybrid children. The Lager Velho from Portugal site, Lager Velho 1 or LV1, is the child that we call the Lupito child. This child is about 4 years old. The age given by teeth and bone age is 3.5 to 5. So they're calling him a roughly 4. And he was buried in this intensely artifact-rich burial. There is a site that you can scroll through on here, and there's several links. I'm going to show this picture here and a couple other pictures from this site. But what I want to talk about is why we think this child is 2 different species without DNA evidence. When we're looking at this child, we're looking at a child that's about 22 to 25,000 years ago. This child is buried with rabbit bones, or a rabbit. So it's fully articulated. Well, it's not fully articulated now, but it appears that it was when it was laid to rest. 2 red deer bones, hips, and jewelry, which is associated with the Gravatian culture. That this child comes from post-Gravatian into the Solutrean culture. So this is very late Gravatian period, very early Solutrean period. This is a time period where we believe that Neanderthal has died out completely by a few thousand years. We believe that Neanderthal has died out completely by 30,000 years ago. This child's morphology is what leads us to believe that it's half Neanderthal or part Neanderthal and part Homo sapien. The child's morphology along the jaw is the really big one. And I'm going to go ahead and put that one up really quick. Now, on the top of this, you see you see Leherbeho 1. So this child, no, but that's cute. No, she was found in Denisovian cave. That's why they call her Denny. Um, so that's really cute though. Uh, the Lehervelho site, Lehervelho 1 is this child, the Lapido child. This is what his mandible, this part of the jaw, the lower part of the jaw looks like. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you get a little bit of me and still see the text. So this part of the jaw is the mandible. Now, this lower jaw here is a Homo sapien jaw. And what you see with this lower jaw here is how it kind of goes straight down here, right? It has that kind of, it's probably better on this one, has this kind of curve like this right here, this being where it's attaching, right? And it also, though it's kind of cut off, has what we call the mental eminence. The mental eminence is unique to Homo sapien. We are the only species that has this. Now you can see with the Lapido child that he has a mental eminence. His chin goes straight down. Neanderthal's chins slope backwards. If you are on the website, the two skulls at the top of the website, the widdaord.com site, are a Neanderthal and a sapien, so you can kind of see that comparison on that site. But a Neanderthal chin slopes backwards, and their jaw here slopes kind of forward. So you have this sloping backward chin and this sloping forward jaw, and they kind of meet like this. Whereas our chin points forward and our jaw is more sharply angled. The Lehervelho site, the Lapido child, does not have the back part of our mandible, but he has the front part of our mandible, though it's not as severe as you might see in other Homo sapiens. So this is evidence that we're looking at a child who has Neanderthal ancestry because he has characteristics that are what we call derivative of Neanderthals, something that is them, right? Just like he has characteristics that we call derivative or only seen in something that is us, Homo sapiens, the chin. I don't think I have the pictures of his legs, but the next thing that we see within this child is that the upper parts of this child's limb bones seem to be Homo sapien. They seem to be longer, but the lower part of this child's limb bones seem to be shorter, and the ratio is Neanderthal. So with the ratio of the lower to upper limb bones being significantly different than it is in Homo sapien, and the lower limb bones being significantly shorter than they are in Homo sapien and more Neanderthal-like in appearance, not appearance, but in size, we're seeing that this child is probably a few generations down of a mix of Neanderthal and Homo sapien. Now, we believe a few generations down, mainly because we don't believe Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, like Neanderthal was gone to our understanding by this time. I do want to double down when I talk about that, that's our understanding. This could change tomorrow. We could have a find tomorrow that puts Neanderthals being here 10,000 years ago, right? We can absolutely see that he's just a cute kid, isn't it? We can absolutely see that we're finding all things new all the time that really change our perspective of humanity and our time here, like the Boise Eye tool usage, or the fact that Naladi that we just found out this year is the first to bury their dead like 200,000 years before we even think of it, right? So we could absolutely have a change here tomorrow, but the current understanding is that this child is roughly 4,000 years after the end of the last Neanderthals. So this is several generations down and still getting some Neanderthal characteristics within this child. Again, we don't have DNA on this child. Ancient DNA still has some very serious, problems with it. Like it's because DNA, like everything else, has a half life. Like all other elements, has a half life. Uh, and that half life is completely dependent upon the environment in which it is stored. So, if that body is stored in an extremely cold, an extremely dry environment, the DNA is going to last longer. If it's an extremely wet or an extremely hot or wet, hot environment, the DNA is going to last a lot less. This site is in Spain, on the lower part of the Iberian Peninsula. There is a map on the site that I posted on it, so you'll be able to see exactly where, and you'll also be able to see the bone structure of the child in the limbs. It also goes into a little bit more um, of the bone structure that's easier to see when you see the limbs with it. But I'll tell you where kind of. So the Iberian Peninsula comes down and almost touches Africa right here. This is the Straits of Gibraltar. Up over here is Leher, Lagarvelho, Lehervelho Valley, and it is kind of near that upper tip, but not quite near the upper tip of the Iberian Peninsula that reaches out into the Atlantic Ocean. That's real, and we shouldn't be. Absolutely not. If any, I mean, I personally believe we shouldn't be digging people up. I don't believe that we should be creating housing or structures that need that. Like I personally, that's part of my land back burn into the ground thought process. But I do believe that any removal or movement or anything that requires that needs to be led by Indigenous people. I don't know if you saw the current Miami dig. There's a dig in Miami that is proving a civilization 7,000 years old in Miami. And they're trying to shut it down right now, which I'm hoping that they do, because descendants are still living in that area, right? But they have recently found information, or a site that stretches back and shows a continued vast city civilization 7,000 years old, right? So I like the archaeologist in me, or the prover in me, I think is really what it is. It's like, ha ha, fuck you, told you. And the other part of me is put it back, right? Like there's a part of me who's like, I want this evidence so I can tell you you're wrong. And then there's a part of me that's like, put grandma back because that's not okay, right? Like it kind of goes back and forth for me. Though I'm always, 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 always on the side of land back. Like if you don't want it, like if the descendants in that area are saying, don't do it, don't fucking do it. And I'm so glad that we have the information now. Get the hell out, like thanks for proving it. Bye, so it's even in those two sides, I'm really always no, they do not actually. Like they're trying to, and I think they're going to federal court to try and shut it down, I think. Which sucks that they have to go that far, right? I think that's what I saw come across. I could be wrong, but I do know that they are in the middle of a movement to try to shut down the dig. It is a dig that was kind of there before. There's like the Miami one. I have it actually. There's two sites with the freeway in between them and office buildings here, and it's kind of like up against waterway. The top site is the older site that they had that is like 2,000 years old, and is like they found a chief. Is like a chief, or it's related to like a leader, right? And then the bottom site is more recent. They had found a couple things there, and then they just started digging in 2018, I think. And then they just published about finding, and it's only like in the Miami Herald, it's not global yet, about finding artifacts that are 7,000 years old. And then like a month after the publication came across, I started seeing there is a movement down there to shut down the site, which is absolutely, so what happens is when construction is happening, They have people. This is CRM archaeology within archaeology within the Turtle Islands or within the United States. So a CRM, content resource management, something like that, goes to the site at a construction site and they do test digs. And those test digs tell you whether or not there is artifact there, whether or not there is human occupation there. And if any of those test digs find human occupation, they broaden it out and they shut down the construction. So as long as there's something there, a couple of things can happen. You can either shut down construction completely. Either way, you shut down construction completely. You can either do that and continue a dig in the area, or you could do that and just shut the area off and return it to local nation for the local nation to come in and do what they feel relevant for the space, what they feel right for the space. A lot of times they'll bring in cultural mediators, people from the local nation who have knowledge of the archaeological structure or the structure of archaeology, the academic. And they'll come in and they'll evaluate the site to make sure whether or not it is a indigenous site or something else. And then it gets turned over to those groups to basically do what is right for them, right? Certain groups will do different things. You might see a group that will take there was a skull that was found in the Wounded Knee site. And I only know about it because somebody who was a friend of mine was the archaeologist called in on it. They're Lakota, and they were called in and they evaluated, and then it was an infant skull, and they brought in people to do ceremony, and then they ended up leaving the skull. To my knowledge, I can't remember exactly though, but I remember that it was something that the nation itself was able to make the decision on, right? So you find that certain nations are going to make a decision to remove and rebury or repatriate in a different area or something along those lines. Certain nations are going to say, leave it. The government's supposed to respect that. The construction people are supposed to respect that. It's not always what happens. Yeah. And that's, like I said, sometimes, despite the government protections that are in place, and I need to remind that the government protections are in place to protect the people from the government, despite the government protections that are in place, and despite the protections that are placed on construction companies to protect Indigenous peoples, it's not always what happens, right? Sometimes they just remove them all. And yeah, that's horrific. So when we're looking at sites, so European sites are different. The reason European sites are different is because they're digging up their own ancestors. Dig up your own ancestors, that's fine, right? In some instances, obviously, there are indigenous groups within Europe that are currently being harmed. The Sami Day was like National Sami Day, or International Sami Day was like 3 or 4 days ago. Sami are still fighting. Sami went through residential schools. Sami have had to deal with a lot of crap. There's other specific groups, the Ainu in Japan, Welsh, the Khmer are still fighting for their land back. The same with the Irish, right? Yes, Apache, Dene. There are so many spaces within here, right? But within Europe, when you look at things like within Spain, you look at things like within Greece and stuff like that, you dig up all you want. That's great. It's your ancestors. You're allowed to. That's why I have no problem with archaeology in Europe. I have no problem going over there and studying archaeology or getting involved in the digs. I have a serious issue here, unless we're looking at things like residential schools or something like that. But when we are looking at these children, when we're looking at these finds, what we should understand is that these different groups mixing together in singular bands is this example of this lack of othering, this lack of the need to have somebody to hate, the lack of the need to have somebody who is the bad guy. Our idea that we need to have a bad guy is seriously rooted in distraction and propaganda, right? Um, your next door neighbor doesn't want to hurt you. Your next door neighbor might even seem aggressive, but they're aggressive because they think you want to hurt them. It's the bottom line of it. I mean, I don't do politics in here for a lot of reasons. One of them is that I realize fully and completely that, with the exception of very few people, we aren't out to fucking kill each other, and we're all fighting the same thing, right? Left and right, those are two fucking wings on the same bird, and most of us are just tired of the government killing us, right? It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, right? Uh, if you're trying to control me, you can kiss my ass, because I don't want the government to do it. I don't want you to do it either, right? If you're out for more governmental control, it's a whole different story. But most people out there currently today are not out to kill you. They're just trying to survive like the rest of us, right? And a lot of what we see that is really destroying between communities, that is really keeping us all really in this space, is that lateral violence that comes when they're turning us against each other to formulate their own means, right? Absolutely. Well, and so peculiar, it's created before that, to my belief. So when I look at it on an archaeological level, we start to see this creation start with not capitalism, with the narcissistic god kings. When we start to see ownership of land, and the idea that land is not alive, right? That land is something that can be owned, that land is a possession that I can have, right? And when we start to see possession based on a dehumanizing of something, right? That to me, that start of Western style agriculture and that rise of god kings is where we see that start of othering. We see it start with the barbarians in the hills versus us, right? Like, you need to give me grain to feed my army to protect you from the barbarians, the hills. And then we see it translate into that other nation state isn't as advanced as us and they're trying to kill us. And then we see it translated into that other religion is sinful and we must eradicate them because they're sinful. And then when we see landing on Turtle Island is when we start to see that racism coming within, that idea that it has to do with locale and skin color, right? Absolutely, absolutely. And the reason to me that's important is because when we're looking at this before time, what we're looking at is all of us believing that we're a part of the biome and mixing within that biome and being a part of that biome, which those of us with indigenous backgrounds, and you, from what I've heard and from what I can see, probably you are along that lines. But those of us with indigenous backgrounds have that understanding that we're a part of that biome, that understanding that we're all this connected. Whereas Western thought, which starts with that ownership of land and that start of control of land, because that's what that Western agriculture is. It's the first time that we see, I'm going to remove all the nutrients and strip the biome and replace it with something, right? That starving of things, that control, that hyper micromanagement, right? And when we see that start on a city level and we see that become a control level, we start to see that need to maintain control, right? To me, it starts with the narcissistic god kings because we see this in all of our written histories, right? This idea, when we look at these god kings, we see that most of them start with just horrific childhoods. And that horrific childhood tends to result in them believing that they're part God and needing that worship. So that's why I say the narcissistic god kings, which I believe we kind of breed for, and we've kind of bred for since then. And that's why we have such a high prevalence of what we call the dark triad. Um, and with that, I see that that disconnect. Hello, beautiful. It is Wednesday, isn't it? Yes, it's Wednesday because I have my appointment this morning. Yes, it's Wednesday. Might not be Wednesday where you're at, but it is Wednesday here. Um, but when we see that translate over, and we can actually watch as that thought process rolls out through history, and that translation over is where we get Oh, that's awesome. That makes me. That roll out is where we get that idea that in all areas where we see that disconnect start to happen, right? Where we start to see this idea that we're not just this broad, interconnected part of the biome. And in that ability to disconnect from being one with the biome, we see that ability to disconnect from being one with each other. And we start to lose our understanding that as Homo sapiens, as a human species, we've all been extremely global for a long period of time. And in that extreme globality of us, and being global, our entire point of humanity, our entire time of existence, really, we're seeing that it is that admixture from everything. It is that constant mixing, that constant movement, that constant new box, that constant new space, that constant new area that gives us the brilliance that we associate with being Homo sapien, right? It is that constant fluctuation that not only gives us that spark of creation because over the next rise, but gives us that spark of intermix because, again, two boxes or two cultures meeting creates a spark of understanding, but also gives us this brilliant physical adaptation that we are able to have as we move across the planet, right? And in all of this, we truly see that root and innate of us is that creativity, that community, and that nurturing. And when we've disconnected from those things that are so innate and so much in need of who we are, we hit this state of severe trauma and pain. We hit this state of disconnect. We hit this state where we're afraid to leave our houses because somebody is most likely going to harm us. We hit this state where people's disconnect combined with this heroization of being greedy, right? Combined with this idea that what you're exploitable for, how much I can exploit and take from you is your worth to me instead of being worthy just because you contribute to our being as a human, right? Like just being born and alive in and of itself continues our species within the nurturing and communal dynamic that we must have as a species to continue. So you don't need to perform for me to be worthy to the community, right? But this idea that you must perform some arbitrary function that's been decided by somebody else to be of worth to the community really sets us up in this space that we're in now. And I'll tell you, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, and I don't care who you are, nobody's happy. Nobody's happy. Even the narcissistic God King still in charge are not happy because they know it's coming, right? Even they aren't happy, and we see it. We see it when fucking Elon Musk bought fucking Twitter to try and prove a point and lost 40 billion, right? They always want more. It's never enough. And no matter how many kids you have, no matter how many companies you buy, you're still missing that connection that we all innately know we need, right? We see that in love stories. You can't watch a movie without romance in it. You can't read a story without connection of some form, right? We all know that connection is a very big need. I have a narcissistic ex, and I'll tell you right now, he's not happy. Doesn't matter how much he accumulates, doesn't matter how much he treats how much he traumatizes everybody around him, he's not happy, right? You're not happy when you're causing trauma on other people because you're missing that connection that we all innately crave within us. We all innately crave love, right? And so this space that we're in now, this thought process we're in now is harmful to all of us. Just like we talk about the fact that toxic masculinity harms males just as much as it harms females. Because if the only thing that you're allowed to feel is anger or lust, then you have no ability to express any of the other emotions that you're going to have. You have to shut them all off and shove them all down. And that creates depression and anxiety. It's why our rates of unaliving are rising in young men, right? It's why young men are harming themselves at an exponential rate because of the fact that they're so disconnected and lonely and they're not able to even talk about it. And when you teach somebody that the only feelings that they're allowed to feel to be a perfect idea of a man is to be aggressive or to feel lust, anger or lust, then you've set up rape culture. If the only thing you can feel is anger and lust, then you're going to combine those two. And if you're owed something from it, right? So we have set up to where, it hurts all of us. It hurts even the ones that we think it's benefiting, right? And when we can look at it like that and understand it like that, then we can understand that it's not about getting back. It's not about acquiring more. It's about changing the dynamic of the ideology. You have to change the ideology that says that your value is placed on what somebody can exploit out of you. You have to change the ideology that states that, all men only feel aggression and lust, and all women are manipulative and whiny. You have to change those ideologies, because if you don't change those ideologies, then you can't. I've talked a few times in here and I've talked with other people. I've, talked about this with some of the campaigns I've been asked to talk on and stuff like that. There is no culture, color, or creed without greed today. We are all brought up to think as a cultural whole, that your value is based on a green dollar, like on a gold, right? Your value is your weight in gold, right? What you can provide. And then we're all taught that that is based on an arbitrary number. And it doesn't matter what culture you're in, this is everywhere. Now, that does not mean that there are not members of cultures, of all cultures, who do not follow that ideology. But what it does mean is that when you are looking within cultures for leadership, when you're looking within spaces for understanding, when you're trying to move within spaces and create change, that you have to make sure that the people who are creating the change or taking those spaces and those things have not bought in, right? Have not become a part of. We see this all the time where somebody is being called out as being destructive to specific groups, right? And this is because we all have internalized these things. Some of us have been able to shove off the internalization. Some of us grew up outside of the internalization. And so we were able to look at it differently when we became a part of it or stepped into it. But we've all had this part of our lives that this is taught to us as the ideal, right? And so we have to have this understanding that that's why people react and act in the way that they do. And when we're looking for those who lead us or move us forward or have the ideas to change us, we have to make sure that those things aren't they're still going to be within all of us, right? There's still going to be that it's like people going to Standing Rock and everybody's like, how you get in there? You going to drive? I can fight oil. I still know I need a car to get to fight the oil, right? Like I still have to live within what is going on today, right? It's when you see that living within what is going on today translate into trying to get as much as I can out of the deal, right? And so we have to be careful and wary of those things as we move forward. Be careful and wary as we change ideas. And then I only bring that up because I see so much where we're finding this infighting, where we're finding this. First of all, there's a lot of people within all groups who are out just for themselves. And when they are out just for themselves, they tend to cause drama to distract from their out just from themselves. And if they can create drama between groups, whether it's creating drama between Black people and Indigenous people, or creating drama between women and men, or creating drama between Indigenous groups of nations, or creating East Side, West Side drama, right? It doesn't matter what kind of drama they're creating. When they can create drama, they can maintain power. So when you're finding people who are creating drama, they are using it to maintain power. And this is a huge key that this is not who you want to follow. Um, Calling out, calling in, those things are necessary. Though I would remind people that if you are not a member of a community and you do not know somebody, you don't call them in. It's not a call in. Calling comes from members of a community who know you, right? Who have watched your shit for a minute and they're like, hey, sis, I need you to check that shit, right? That's what a call in is, right? Um, so I would remind that, but I would double down on the reminder that because we are not innately violent, because we are not innately fighting the evil within us, because we are innately nurturing and communal, or in any way, shape, or form, or in any way, shape, or form, seeming to utilize different things as a performative action, I guess is the best way to put it, then those are the people that you need to steer clear for leadership, right? And when you see the infighting going across, when you see the lateral violence coming out and happening, calling it out instead of participating is the key. This is not acceptable. Y'all shouldn't be fighting in front of folks like this. Why don't y'all talk about it internally? And, why don't we have a sit down and bring it to a table? But whatever you do, I don't know if y'all seen the new Wonder Years, but the new Wonder Years in like episode 1 has this scene where two parents are fighting. It's an all black cast. It's an amazing show. Has this scene where two parents are fighting at this softball game, and there's a lot of white people around. And the boy goes on to voice over, and he says they had broken the cardinal rule: don't act a fool in front of white people. And that's something that comes to mind when I watch groups in their lateral violence in public spaces like TikTok or Facebook or social media. First of all, I'm going to duck out of any social media anywhere where that's all I'm running into. It's traumatic for me. I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to be called in on it. I don't want to be tagged in on it. I don't want to be a part of it. It's shitty behavior. It's morally unethical to me. Second of all, I think, wow, aren't you showing them our ass? So when we look at humanity's history, it is important to understand that that which is innately us, being communal and nurturing, means that connection with everything around you, from the earth beneath your feet to the trees over your head to the squirrel chittering in the branches, right? Means that connection to your biome, wherever your biome happens to be. And that when we use our anger and our disconnect to start attacking people who are just trying to do better as well, just trying to be resilient and subscribe as well. Subscribe, I don't know why that word's on my head today. Subsist as well, then we absolutely fail to reconnect in the way that we want to reconnect. Right? We absolutely. And I would remind people that in the spaces where colonization came in and destroyed groups, which is a global thing, that in those spaces, that our ancestors, I don't care where you're at, unless your ancestors started the colonization thought process, that our ancestors welcomed people with open arms. It's absolutely in evidence here in the Turtle Islands. It's absolutely in evidence among the Celts. It's absolutely in evidence in every space that I have ever studied. This welcoming with open arms, this enfolding within communities, because this is the animistic and indigenous way that we were prior to Western thought. So when we gatekeep, when we cross attack, when we fall into this pattern of I've had it worse than you have, or I should be the one in charge, or they harmed me, so I'm going to get everybody to harm them, or they think differently, so let's all take them down. That we are being the colonist thought process that so many of us are trying so hard to change. It is a colonial thought process that your ethics are better than everybody else's and your ideas are better than everybody else's. That is a colonial thought process. I made it 1 hour and 46 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and go because I am in severe pain. We'll talk again about hybrid children, I'm sure. Again, I want to remind everybody or tell people who are just coming in, I am moving next month on the 11th, so I'll be sporadic due to that. And then I have surgery on the 27th. And so that week I will most likely, hello, child of mine, I will most likely not be doing lives that week because I will most likely be laid up in bed with my other child down here visiting me and taking care of me. So I will be a little bit sporadic. I was in last night. I am at a space where I'm trying to get in more. Yeah, baby, my hysterectomy, getting my womb taken out. Finally, thank God, done use that thing. So I want to just remind everybody of those things. With the move, things behind me will change up a bit. Working on still doing a couple of things. I did that book like 5 different ways and none of them worked. And I have the way I want it to do it right now. And so I have it set in my head. I just can't sit down and do it. And I'm going to try and work on that. But I will be. It's your youngest brother's birthday and I'm going in to get my hysterectomy removed or my hysterectomy. And I find the irony in having a hysterectomy done on the 16th anniversary of my last child's birth to be pretty heavy. That to me is pretty top notch. But again, I we'll be discussing this again. And if you came in late, or you want to watch the whole live again, all of my lives are streamed side by side on YouTube, which is that right there. So you can go and watch the full live from there. And then all of the sources and the links are in the widdaord.com site. The hybrid children sources are under this week, and it's hybrid children. And then the bibliography for the rest of today's talk is under bibliographies, and I believe it's under Neanderthal under bibliographies. So please feel free to check out those resources, check out the YouTube, and I'll be around. Thank you so much, everybody. Adore you guys. Just a reminder that you are valuable and valid, right? That I don't have pics in YouTube, unfortunately, but all the pictures come from the websites that are under the This Week tab under the Hybrid Children. So you can go through them on there and see them because I don't know how to green screen on YouTube. I'm trying to figure stuff out, but I'm still such a Luddite. Um, I didn't see technology until I was like 10 anyways, right? So, uh, but I just want to remind you all that despite what the world around you tells you, that you have value just by being here, that you are helping continue our species, part of the community and the nurturing just by being here, that you do not have to subscribe to being exploited by others to have value. And that we are beautiful innately. Innately, we are nurturing and communal. Innately, the reason that you feel the pain of this disconnect is because this is not innately us. Um, so give yourself grace in it, right? As we're trying to fight for these changes and make changes in the world around us, give yourself grace for feeling the horror of it and for hurting from it. Because it'd be scarier if you didn't, right? It'd be scarier if this was just all easy to you, right? So give yourself the grace of the fact that that is absolutely being a healthy individual, right? The healthy mental fight to live in an unhealthy society. Thank you guys. Much love, everybody. Much love, YouTube. Have a great day, you guys. Thank you so much, Katie. I'm so glad you found it over here. Bye, Mish.